Good morning, all of you. So today I'm very excited to demonstrate this scenario. We are looking at AWS privilege escalation. So we are basically taking into account CloudBank breach S3. So I will be putting a little bit emphasis on hypothesis. So for example, adversary can query instance metadata if that EC2 is misconfigured and should be able to retrieve, the temporary credentials, right? Our scenario here is attacker has successfully retrieved temporary credentials which he has later exploited to exfiltrate data from one of the S3 buckets, right? So before I really get into my Splunk console to demonstrate the same, so I'm using modern dataset. It is one of the open data sources. You can also use that kind of the data set. So just give me a sec. So for example, I just wanted to point it out. If you can see that curl, right, and you can see that this is nothing but the IP, and if somebody already has the previous knowledge, you can see that this is one of the public IP ranges associated with the Amazon, right? So this is one of the public IP address associated with that particular EC2 instance. And you can also see we are basically giving information like 169.254. So it is just like a loopback address. So for example, for us, loopback address is 127.0.0.1. So this is nothing but instance metadata IP. If you really want to query any kind of the information pertaining to the EC2 instance, you basically use this particular IP address, right? So which stays constant. So you can see that if I query this, if I do curl, and so for example, this is the output I have received so far. So this output is nothing but this is basically giving me an indication that this is one of the EC2 role attached to the EC2 instance in question. So our EC2 instance IP address is nothing but 35.174. So in the next step, I'm also taking advantage of whatever the information I have received for EC2 role that is associated with the EC2, right? So for example, you can see again, I am basically making the use of this, instance metadata IP address. So again, I have received the information, right? So this time I have received, so for example, you also know that if we are basically assuming any kind of the EC2 role, it also generates temporary credential for that matter, right? So which stays valid for 4 hours duration or more, right? So you can see that I have got temporary credentials, I have got access key ID, I have also got secret access key, and here we have not, I think this is, the token is not really mentioned in this particular slide as of now, but when I move back to my console, Splunk console, I will show the token related information as well. So I just need to go back to my previous slide. So yeah, so I think I will just take 20 seconds more and then I will be getting back to my console, right? So just bear me for a moment, right? So you can see that now adversary have already received the temporary credentials. We have seen access key ID, we have seen secret access key, we have also seen the temporary token, right? So you can see that now adversary is able to configure one of the profile and the name is nothing but erratic, right? So he has listed access key ID, secret access key, and you can also see the information. So for example, when you're trying to configure any profile, you also need to put your token related information as well, so which is not really listed here, but I will show you when I move to the Splunk console. Now you can see that again, so we are basically here. So for example, you can see again AWS session token. So you are basically trying to so this is the file in which your credential related information is getting stored. So you can see that I'm just trying to export some of the uh, that attacker is trying to export one of the parameters or arguments like AWS session token into this particular file. So again, this particular so he need to attacker must have given the token related information in this particular case. So we will be looking at that particular thing. So just just a second. So I will be moving on to my console now and I will be deleting all those. So that's it. So now I will be using this particular index where my dummy data resides, and so so without any further delay, I will start referencing my notebook as well, right? So the very first head start, now we already know what has already happened in our environment. But when we do threat hunting, we do not we just consider this might be the hypothesis, and we will be firing some of the random queries and try to see whether whether we receive some kind of the information or not. So I will be getting started with, let's say I am interested in the activities which are being carried out from outside the network. So I will be using this particular query. So let me copy this particular query to our Splunk console. So you can see that, right? So if I do this, so you can see that I have got 103 events. So here I will be interested in the source IP address, right? So let's see what are the events that has already been performed by outside network, right? So let me put some more emphasis on the query which we have used. So you can see that I have explicitly mentioned no. So I have explicitly basically mentioned not. So you can see that so I am basically excluding the internal IP ranges, which is nothing but 10.0.0/8, 192.168, 172.16, and you can also mention any of the public CIDR IP ranges which are corresponding to your enterprise network, right? So so that's it, and just give me a sec. So if I scroll down, I'm interested in the source IP address. So if I click here, you can see that this is the external source IP address. Again, this is the dummy data set. Therefore, your the original IP address has already been masked by the random looking IP address. And you can also see some of the calls which have already been generated by one of the AWS service, which is nothing but EC2, right? So this is a good head start. So let us record this information. This might be useful for us, right? So let us record this information. So let's say this is the IP address. So I will put like the IP address, and so I need not put any kind of the time, but if we are interested, we can also put the time. So we have recorded this information, right? So let me move back to my OneNote once again. So now I will be interested in what are the activities that are being performed by this source IP address, which is external in nature, and I don't really know and this is not really a trusted IP address, not belong to the third party, not belong to our partners, not belong to our enterprise. So let me try to, so for example, I have copied this query and I will just run this particular search. It will take a moment. So here it is, so it is basically listing what are the activities. So when I say activities, activities are nothing but the event names, right? So if I keep on scrolling down, so you can see these are all the activities which are which have been performed. So for example, describe alarms, describe instance status. You can also see who is the user identity ARN. So in our case, this is the AWS account which is in question, and you can see the I am user. So username here is nothing but Pedro, right? So this is the principal ID, and this is the access key ID, right? So if I go down, I also see some of the activities performed by the so this is the role. You can see the modder, engine, stack, banking, WAF role, right? So this is one of the role which is basically performing some of the activities like assume role. You can also see the event names like get objects, list objects, and list buckets and list objects as well. So these are activities that are being carried by the source IP address, which really looks suspicious to us, right? So from here on, what I will be recording is, so for example, because we already know what has happened, but let's try to record some of the information. So for example, I will be recording this particular user because and he is an IAM user. So let's record if we really want to use for the future purpose. And I will also be recording this particular EC2 role related information, and similarly I will also be recording the user access ID. So let's say this is the one of the access IDs, and I will also be recording the second one. So this is the so whenever the EC2 role is assumed, there is a temporary credentials which is getting created. Like I was just trying to tell you in a brief that the session token, access key IDs, and secret access keys. So this is our second security or Splunk analytics. Now I will be looking at the third one. So for example, we have recorded some of the information, right? So for example, now I know that these are the access key IDs which are being used. So for example, here let me also put it as the source IP address. So this is just for the demonstration, but we have already put it in our search, so that's not an issue. So okay, I have the typo. So here, right, so you can see that now what is really looking very suspicious to me is this is the EC2 role, right? You can see this is the EC2 role, right, and which has already been assumed by one of the external IP address which we do not really have any information about. So therefore we will try to focus on this particular access key ID, right? So let's see how we can. So for example, I will be focusing on this particular access ID for the time being. So I understand I am user. So for example, there may be some of the principals which might try to log in into AWS account from from the IP address assigned to the internet service provider. But for the EC2 roles, it's really dubious, right? When so your source IP address should always be let's say your enterprise or your internal IP address or your public IP range belonging to one of the organizations, your enterprise network for that matter. So let me move on, right? So since now I gave you a little bit of explanation why I'm really interested in this particular access key ID. So and I will be making a very small search here, and let's see what are the events we are getting as of now, right? So if I go back, you can see that information with respect to the compromise key. So I cannot really say whether this is a compromise key, but I really suspect that, right? So I'm trying to look at some of the information. So let's say I will be interested in region. So all the activities are carrying out in the North Virginia region, and I am interested in the activities. You can see that one of the event name is assume role, list buckets, get object, right? So some of the times I also list some of the activities like list describe, but the get object is one of the event that basically shows get object is nothing but your object or your file from one of the S3 bucket is downloaded somewhere, right? So just wanted to make you all aware, right? So these are the event names. And I am also interested in the event source. You can see that one of the event source is S3 and one of the event source is STS, right? So this is the information I have had. So I can also record this information. What are the event source? I have information with respect to the one of the access key IDs which might be compromised in nature, right? So let me try to make our search even more deeper. So now you can see that I will be looking at my fourth Splunk analytic, which might give us an assurance that this is what has happened in this particular bucket. So I need not do much of the things. I will only explicitly put event source as an S3. So you can see that here I have put event source as an S3, and then I am trying to capture some of the information in a tabulated manner, which I am really interested in, right? So if I if I ran this particular command, so I have again got very useful information. So first of all, I am seeing that this is the bucket as of now. So you can see this is the bucket name, modder S3 stack S3 bucket. So your S3 bucket might have some of the configuration related, script related information, cloud formation templates related to your infrastructure or something of that sort. So the name looks like that, right? You can again see the source IP address, so we already drilled down. This is the external source IP, not at all trusted. I don't know. You can see the event names here, so the get object really corresponds to, the object is getting downloaded from one of the S3 bucket, and list object is nothing but somebody is really trying to enumerate S3 buckets. Or for example, if I have access, I'm going to the S3 console. So this is the event which we will be getting recorded in the cloud trail, right? if I really look at the ARN, right, so the first ARN you see, that is basically corresponding to the S3 bucket, right? So S3 bucket name is belonging to the universal namespace. It has to be extremely unique, right, regardless of which particular account you are in. So S3 bucket namespace is unique. And in the second ARN, you can also see that this ARN is corresponding to one of the objects. You can see the object name is nothing but ring.txt, right? So this is the object name which is basically residing under the bucket which we are seeing as of now, right? So you can again see this is the AWS account in which these activities are happening. And similarly, so this is the information we are important, right? So this basically gives us a hint that get object, right? And I can also look at the error code or error message, and which will basically give me an idea that it is successful, right? So the external attacker is basically succeeded in getting an object or downloading an object from the external IP address from this particular bucket, and the bucket name is this, and he has assumed the role which is basically corresponding to the EC2. So he has assumed an EC2 role, right? So let me go back once again. So I think, so I can also do, so for example, I can also classify the objects with respect to the event name, because here we have just tried to list. So let me run this command if that really helps, so I will explain you a bit. So for example, you can see that again, you can see the get object here. So get object, again, if you really look at the ARN, you can see that this ARN is corresponding to the object which is getting downloaded. And if you really look at the list objects, that is basically hinting at whether somebody logs in into the S3 console, and it might also represent the S3 bucket enumeration. So we also know that this is untrusted IP address. So attacker is trying to enumerate this bucket, and once he has enumerated the bucket, he has downloaded this particular object, this particular object from the bucket in question, right? So let me delete that. So the last Splunk analytics which I will be looking at is, you remember that I was just looking for information corresponding to this access key ID, right? So so I got two event sources. One is S3, and now I have got the assurance that somebody has succeeded in downloading one of the object. So whether he is authorized principal or not, I cannot really say at this point in time. But I have also got one more event source which is nothing but STS. So STS is one of the service which basically grants or generates the temporary token or temporary credentials. So I will be looking at STS as a source as of now, right? So now I will be using this command, and the thing which is worth pointing out is, now I really wanted to filter out the events corresponding to STS as a service in AWS, which basically generates temporary credentials. I will be looking at that. I'm also categorizing the events with the help of the timestamps. So you can see that there are certain events. So for example, I can also put count here, so which might give me little more hint. So you can see that I think some of the things worth pointing out here is, you can see that the source IP address is nothing but EC2. So EC2 is nothing but one of the AWS service. You can also see the timestamp at which this particular event or activity has taken place. And you can also look at the ARN. So this is the role. This is the EC2 role which is getting assumed, or the tokens are getting generated for this particular EC2 role, right? We have already identified that this is one of the roles. So for example, if I go back to my, and in the second EC2 role against which we are trying to request something against the STS as a service, I will give you more information just in a second, right? So I just wanted to point out here, just remember this particular key, right? So from which the bucket has already gotten downloaded from the external actor, right, which we suspect is an attacker, right? So just remember VBMX, this is the access key. So if I go back to my Splunk console once again, so can you see here that there are access key IDs? There are basically three temporary credentials which are being generated. So you can see that attacker has basically used this particular temporary credential in order to get object, in order to download the object from an S3 bucket. You can again see the timestamp. So most probably the temporary token, they are basically expired within 4 hours duration or something of that sort. Maximum go to 36 hours. You can also see the account ID, right? You can also see the account ID related information as well, right? So I just wanted to make my pointer once again available. So if I and I will delete all this. So for example, if I really scroll towards the right hand side, I just wanted to make sure that you can see that these are the temporary tokens generated corresponding to this particular EC2 role, right? All the activities are happening in this particular AWS account. And as I told you, right, I will also be showing you the session token, which is very, very essential. So when I was at my slide, we do not have that information mentioned in the slide, but now you can see that, you know, we have one more component when we generate temporary credential, which is nothing but session token, right? So I think I have this particular session token related information, you know, as well. If I go toward the right hand side, so you know, you can see that session token is really, really large, and you can also see that you know, the resource type is nothing but IAM role. So I can successfully say from whatever the detection or whatever understanding we have found here, that you know, the attacker is basically make use of this particular EC2 role. So this EC2 role is associated with the EC2 instance, right? I have also shown you the IP address. So for example, if I go back to my slide just a bit, so for example, this is the IP address 35, right? So this is the EC2 role that is associated with that EC2. And you can see that by querying to the EC2 metadata, we have retrieved the information corresponding to the credentials, right? So this is the access key ID. So you can see that we have also received the information corresponding to the access key ID, and you can also see that secret access key ID is also available, as well as you can see in the Splunk that session token is also there, right? So this is the session token that is corresponding to this access key ID. And I can also list, you know, so obviously our secret access key is not really listed in the CloudTrail for privacy reasons, so that is the reason I do not see that here, right? So these are the things I really wanted to point out, right? So once attacker knows this particular credentials, right, so with the help of this particular access key ID, he has performed the activity, right, you know, like get object, right, which we have seen, the get object event, right? So he has basically downloaded one particular object. That's what I wanted to point out, right? So I will delete all that. So hope you understand what has really happened in our case, and hope you enjoyed the entire scenario. So let me know in your feedbacks or comment, you know, did you like it or not? So thank you for the current video.